To be honest, I never really thought that I'd be recording this sort of episode on this podcast, mostly because I'm the kind of guy that usually speaks up for guys. But this is the very first time, if not one of the very few times, when I'm actually not defending the guys. And once you understand what the topic is about, then you'll kind of understand why that's the case. Of which, for the sake of context, this episode is actually about people being fucked. And I actually don't mean that in a very good way. And unlike most of my other episodes, this episode is mostly about raising awareness, which I do intend on doing, but first I want to at least start from the funnier side of life because there's some shit that just does not fail to amuse me to the point where I'm like, this is some shit that we just have to discuss. Now, the legendary actor known for Scarface and The Godfather, known as Al Pacino, is expecting a baby with his 29-year-old girlfriend, according to reports. Now, don't get me wrong, expecting a baby is particularly normal. There's nothing too interesting about it that should really be spoken about. Except that in this guy's particular case, this is a man who is 82 years old. And I am going to get into why I consider this to be a particularly interesting thing. But before I get to that, when you kind of think about it to a certain degree, and just bear with me on this, this is the second time in 40 years, at least that we know of, that he has told someone to say hello to his little friend.
Get ready for the battle of the sexes.
If you didn't think that I was gonna use that joke at the most open chance that I get, then you are clearly bugging if you haven't been listening to this podcast, because it was literally just right there. And if I have the clip, this is probably the best point in time where I'd probably throw it in.
Say hello to my little friend.
And to think that that statement remains iconic to this day should probably be considered a testament to how legendary the movie, the actor, and just the entire experience was when he said it. But beyond that, there's some very interesting things that I need to look into in this story, because someone actually did a little bit of cross-checking, and the girlfriend that he's had that is supposedly pregnant with his kid, she has a history of dating particularly old dudes, or so it seems, because some of her confirmed and alleged exes are, and I quote, a man known as Nicholas Bregwin, if that's his name, he's 61 years old. She used to date Mick Jagger, who was 79 years old, at least right now, Clint Eastwood, who is 93 years old right now, and Al Pacino, who is the current one, who is 82 years old. Like, you kind of think about it, I don't know, maybe she likes gray-haired dick. Maybe. Because this particular situation isn't one that you can refer to as daddy issues. This is quite literally granddaddy issues. And I never really thought such a term would exist, but this woman is clearly showing us that. And besides the fact that she's gotten pregnant by a guy this old and she's decided to keep the baby, no silent abortions or some shit, really does play to some very interesting ideas, because maybe she thought that she wouldn't get pregnant off the guy, but even though you thought that was the case, realizing that you are pregnant would just mean that if you don't want the kid, you go and abort. So for her to choose to keep the kid with this guy, which quite literally makes him the oldest male actor in Hollywood to actually get a woman pregnant, beating, I think it was Robert De Niro at 79 years old, is very, very weird in and of itself. Like, it's not the jokes which are funny, it's not the massive age gap of 54 years which you can fit someone who's planning for retirement in there. Like, it's literally the fact that she's decided to keep the kid. Because, if anything, this sounds like a case of a woman who has some very interesting fetishes or just really, really wants someone's inheritance so badly. But anyways, that said, because this isn't going to be the main thing that I talk about this episode, I am going to leave it at that and move it on. So, without further ado, we need to start things off in a much better manner. You know, kinda like... Welcome to Breaktime on Westside, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who does believe that old is gold, at least not the way this woman does, but I guess, statement still stands. He is a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. This show is Battle of the Sexes, our weekly love, sex, and relationships show where I get to talk about old people shagging. I get to talk about young people. I get to raise a little bit of awareness, and some people might disagree, but I usually like to come through with that conclusion. And if you agree with it, if you don't agree with it, if you feel like you need to suggest something that we should talk about in the future, or if you just want to say hi, then the place to do it at is at Breaktime on West Side on Facebook or on IG. The DMs are always open. On Twitter, you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at Bagaka the D. You can also send tweets that you'd like me to discuss for Tweet Street there. And if you're looking for good spelling or you forget, this particular part exists on the podcast, then I will have the links to everything below. Now, we do have quite the episode that is planned, and this is probably going to be one of the more interesting situations because I think this is the first, if not one of the few episodes where I do not defend men at the very least. Like, there's no defense that I'm giving here because y'all need to be called out for some shit, or at least some of us men need to be called out for some shit. Because, there's some wild shit that's going on that just needs to be spoken about on this podcast. But before I get into any of that, I need to bring up a story that I felt was a little bit sus. Now, I'm going to read the title for you and I'm going to read everything that comes with it. So, the title is A First-Year Student Confesses to Infecting 273 Students with HIV. Now, I read this title and it was sent over by a friend of mine. Mad shoutouts to you, Drake. I really appreciate it. And the story reads, and I quote, Diana has revealed the number of students, including lecturers, she has infected with HIV. The sizzling student says she has finished 273 men and is on a mission to claim another 1,000 in 4 years. In a surprising Facebook post, Diana says, and I quote, I want to say something in this group. I am a first-year student at Maseno University. I am gifted with looks, but I am HIV positive. Since I joined Maseno University, I have eaten 273 students and 3 lecturers, and I am still counting. End quote. And end of story. Now, when this was sent to me, and I actually kind of saw it, I think most people that would read this would automatically panic and be like, oh shit, things are bad, blah, blah, blah. To which I'll say, if you actually do a bit of research, you'll realize that this story is probably about 3 to 5 years old, if not more. And I feel like I've heard this story mentioned by a bunch of different people a bunch of different times. Now, by all means, you can come out, say this is old news or this is fake news and everything, and you could be right for the most part. But I feel like whenever people actually read stories like this, I usually understand that some people just want to jump to conclusions and be like, oh shit, things are bad out here. But the reality of it is it's probably not as bad as you think. And I'm not trying to downplay the situation, but for the most part, a lot of people nowadays are trying to push news that just, gets eyeballs to look at it and, gets people to react to it rather than actually look at whether the information is real or not. Because this story isn't particularly new. The photo of the girl who's supposedly claimed to be doing all of this doesn't look like a particularly new photo or something that, has been taken over the past 3 years, because camera technology has just gotten better. And maybe that's just me nitpicking it. But at the end of the day, if you ever see some of these stories, I feel like sometimes going to look for it in a reputable news site is actually good. But that said, I also don't like it when people push some of these recycled stories, because it can sort of push other people to do the same thing, because it feels and it sounds as though it's something that happens a lot. Because there's a story of the 300 people, I don't know how many years ago. There's a story of 273, this one that's being recycled, I don't know how many years ago. Like, you hear people talking about them time and time again. And yes, by all means, this should probably push you to wear a condom, whenever you go and bang someone, no matter how casual. But at the same time, it can also incite people that mean to do harm, that might have the disease, to actually embrace this sort of thing. Because if you hear more people talking about it, you will find that people will be prone to trying it out because they know that other people are doing the same thing. Because society nowadays, or at least society in general, believes that it's not as bad if more people are doing the same thing, even though it's actually morally not right. And if you think I'm lying about it, go and look into cheating. People have spoken about how bad infidelity is time and time and time again. But nowadays people are more comfortable with that shit because I guess we've had more and more people talking about cheating and more people glorifying it to a certain degree. So at the end of the day, you actually realize that society as a whole does not particularly act in accordance to what's good. They just act in accordance to what most people consider to be okay, just because a large group of people are doing it, whether or not it actually goes against their morals. So at the end of the day, I will still say that I do think that this story is mostly BS, but people should still be protected whenever they go out and have sex. And if you see stories like this, please try and call them out, or at least do your research, figure out if it seems particularly real or if it's bullshit, and do not hesitate to call out such outlets that feed you some of this information. But anyways, all that said and done, I need to move us on to our main topic of today, and this one is particularly interesting. This is one of the most interesting topics I've ever had to discuss on this episode, mostly because one, I'm not really trying to find a solution to it, and two, it just seems so wild to think about, at least for quite a number of people today, that it just didn't really seem like it was something that happened with a lot of people. But anyways, let me just get into all of it. So I was on Reddit this past week and I stumbled onto a particularly interesting post. And it was from the Reddit Kenya page, and it was posted up by someone known as Soki Gakari Kun. I think that's how it's supposed to be said. Now, it was actually titled Men and Baby Trapping Women, and it actually sounded particularly interesting. It's not something that is totally unsurprising to me, but at the same time, it's not something that I thought is particularly common, or at least something that's practiced by a number of men, or at least the largest cohort of men. But either way, I might as well just read it for you, then I can get into it. So it says, and I quote, "Incidences of men baby trapping women are on the rise. I was listening to Classic FM, a topic on women leaving men and filing for divorce. A man called in and said something interesting. He claimed his then girlfriend seemed to have lost interest in the relationship and was distant. He said he loved the girl quote unquote too much and couldn't let her go. He intentionally got her pregnant despite him knowing she wasn't interested in getting a baby at that time. That lady in question is 23 years old. He went on to convince her to keep the kid and told her he would take care of them and marry her. The girl, not wanting to be a single mom, was forced to stay with the man and raise the kid. Case 2. The man's bitter relationship ended. He calls up his ex for closure and plans to woo her into sleeping with him for old time's sake. The girl takes the bait, man makes sure he nuts in her and convinces her not to take an e-pill because he was careful. Months later, the ex is pregnant, he denies the kid, or accepts it, and leaves her to raise the child alone as revenge. Case 3. An ambitious woman. She tells her spouse or husband of her plans to further her studies or climb up the career ladder. The spouse is happy but worried he might lose his wife to other men and not get the quote-unquote type of marriage he envisioned. So he gets her pregnant the first time and convinces her to take this slow. She postpones the opportunity to further her studies. The maternity leave affects her work performance and keeps her on the same level career-wise. Once a year or two has passed, the guy gets her pregnant again. And again and again. The woman never accomplishes her dream. The guy gets the type of woman he wanted at the cost of his wife's development. Case number 4. The guy feels that the woman he's with is out of his league. Because of the anxiety of being with a woman who surpasses his thoughts of attractiveness, he lets fear drive him into getting her pregnant to cancel any possibility of her leaving him. In case she does, at least he still has a claim over her through the kid and the connection is forever. So, no loss on his side. Ladies, if you are not ready to have a kid, take personal measures to protect yourself. Not all men want good for you. Actually, you might be sleeping with your own enemy or executor. At times, abortion may be the right choice no matter how wrong it feels. It's rather you send the kid back to the maker than co-parent with a snake who wants to see you burnt to ashes because of bitterness and jealousy. Instead of raising a kid in a violent, loveless home, choose you. Choose your peace of mind. Choose your safety. The kid doesn't deserve a mother or father who hates it because of their mistake. Baby trapping by men is real. It may have happened to you." End quote. Alright, now after having read this and even reading it out loud for the podcast, to be very honest, I just have one thing to say. Hey yo, what the fuck is going on out here? Fellas, men, young men, old men, what the fuck is going on out here? Like, how is it that I'm out here busy saying, oh, you know, babes are busy trying to trap dudes and everything, and y'all are doing the exact same thing from your side of the table? How the fuck does that make sense? Like, there's a lot of lack of sense in this entire thing, and to be honest, most guys actually wouldn't believe that this thing is true. Like, it actually does not particularly seem like something that any sensible guy would do, at least by most guys' standards today. But interestingly enough, I actually did find out that there's a term for all of this, and it's referred to as reproductive coercion. That's actually the official term for whatever it is that is being done. And I think it also applies to when a babe chooses to trap a man by getting pregnant by him. But either way, it's weirder to hear that a guy would do the exact same thing. Especially considering that right now, one of the biggest challenges that a lot of guys have, or at least I guess most guys that are growing into their adulthood stages are having, is that there's babes that are willing to risk having a kid out of wedlock because they love you or because they just want to trap you or they see you as potential and shit. Like, I've been speaking out against this for a while, so hearing that there's dudes that are doing the exact same thing to women is even wilder to think about. Although, with that said, I'm gonna start by saying that whatever the hell that I say about babes and trapping dudes, it does not change. I actually still stick to my guns on that entire thing. Like, the whole thing of women choose their baby daddies, I still stick to it. The whole thing of a woman saying that she didn't choose her baby daddy and she just ended up getting the kid being a case of either ignorance, naivete, or stupidity, I still stick to those guns. That is something that I am going to continue saying because there's a lot of babes that need to be told that so that they can admit that they also fucked up. And also, a lot of guys need to be sensitized on this shit. Mostly the guys so that they can also understand that, you know, some of this shit isn't entirely their fault, but they end up being lured into this shit. But with that said, like, you kind of think about it. The whole idea of a guy actively doing whatever it takes to get his babe pregnant, yet they're not married, they have no intention of having kids, at least the both of them haven't agreed on having kids, but the guy is just doing it with an aim of keeping the babe at a certain level or maintaining the babe to a certain degree is just wild to me. Which is why when I was looking through the comments, like, one of the saddest things I saw was how guys were like, oh, you know, you can't just listen to Classic FM stories, some of these things are scripted and people just call in blah blah blah, and they were ignoring a lot of the other cases, but most of them were just look at it as stories are jabba, so it's mostly just BS and guys don't do that shit. But considering that I have actually read stories online about, you know, guys who are like, yo, I think you're gonna make for a great mother, so I just wanted to make it happen, and I think you're amazing and you're beautiful and blah blah blah, and they just say a bunch of bullshit after the baby's like, yo, I'm pregnant, and it's like they actually knew and they wanted it to happen, is something that I still find to be particularly wild. Do I think that it's on the rise? No. I think more and more people are talking about it and more people are finding out about it. So it sounds like it is on the rise, but the reality of it is the number of guys that do this aren't particularly that many. They exist, but they're not as many as some people might think. Because for most guys, this sounds like a very illogical thing to do. And it also sounds like it comes from a fuck ton of insecurity by any of the guys that supposedly want to do such a thing. Although weirdly enough, like, the older generations kind of thought of it as a not so bad idea. The whole idea of, you know, getting a kid so that you can retain the relationship, to which I'll probably tell you that some of you actually exist in this world as a result of that. But I will kind of get into that in a little bit, because in as much as it might seem malicious of them to do such a thing, it doesn't entirely sound as malicious, at least from their point of view. And to a certain degree, I can kind of get it, but also I can sort of point out how dumb of an idea it seems, even though it has worked for some people. Now, when you kind of look at it, at least from the older folk, you might actually hear such a thing being said if they talk about, you know, how their relationship was on the rocks, or, you know, certain things that happened so that a kid could be born. Like, you actually listen to some of them and you will hear them mention such a thing where they're like, our relationship was particularly strained and things were so bad between us, and I didn't want us to ultimately end, so I thought that us having another baby could probably fix that situation and bring us closer together. You'll hear them saying that quite a bit, or at least you'll hear some people saying that. Some people will talk about how their mother or their mother-in-law or their sibling or their relative or their in-laws were busy saying that if you can have a baby, then this man will probably stop cheating or some shit. And to be very honest, yes, maybe it might work in some cases, but the reality of it is that's actually not a great tactic, at least in my very humble opinion. Of course, I'm not married, I'm not old enough or have enough experience to say this definitively, but I believe that having sex a lot more often probably has a much better chance of keeping someone from cheating than you having a kid with them, or at least having another kid with them, to say the least. Because, like, you choosing to have a kid as a way to save the relationship is almost like you choosing to go to war with your competitor in business with the aim of trying to save your business from bankruptcy. Like, yes, it could work because, publicity, buzz and everything, and there's situations where that can work, but for the most part, you'll end up burning through more resources and, possibly might end up bankrupting yourself even worse because you ended up putting in a lot more than you probably should into something that probably shouldn't have happened because it wasn't by natural choice of some sort. But that said, let me not digress any further because I was busy talking about how I find it very logical as a man, or at least as a young man, to actually do such a thing, all with the aim of retaining a particular babe. Because I feel like there's so many other options that you could have taken, so many other smarter, more logical options that you could have taken to retain the babe, of which, even though those ones would have backfired, at the end of the day, this is a human being, so they are going to make their own choices. You trying to find a way to manipulatively force them into choices that they didn't want or probably weren't prepared for is absolutely malicious, and it's quite vile to think of, because even though you want to retain the person, like, what kind of toxic love is this which you have that you'd want to keep the person down or keep the person held back by trapping them with a baby? Something that is so special. Why would you want to use something so special? Why would you want to abuse an opportunity that is so good that 1-2 generations only wish that they'd have gotten when they were your age or in your particular situation, to put someone in a less than optimal position to be at their best? Like, is it really love that you're really looking at there, or is it just you and your toxic sense of manipulation based off of an insecurity? Because when you kind of think about it, at least from a more logical view, there's better solutions that you can throw to all of these cases, or at least most of them, which do not involve you having to put a baby in a babe. And I can sort of try and break them down all particularly quickly because at least I've had a chance to think this through. So, for example, if you look at the first case and the last one, first case was the guy talking about how he loves the babe too much. Last case was the guy talking about how he feels like the babe is so out of his league. Like, you think about it, instead of getting a kid, alright, treat that babe as best as you can. Listen to her, treat her with respect, fuck her disrespectfully if need be. Like, listen to her and try to be as great of a partner as possible. Because if she does not choose to stay with you after that entire time, at the end of the day, at least, she won't be staying with you by force, which can make them a much shittier partner. And if she does choose to stay with you, it is totally from a point of love. It is not from a point of circumstance, which can create differences that can almost be heaven and earth apart, depending on the situation. Then, when you look at, say, the third case, the ambitious woman, talking about her wanting to further her studies and climb up the career ladder, like, my nigga, if you feel like her going up the career ladder, her improving her qualifications and being this top tier boss is such a bad thing, well, I'm here to tell you that it's not as bad as you think. At least, I'm not saying this from experience or anything, but try and rethink the entire situation to your advantage. Because if you're not in as high up of a situation, if you're not in as better off of a situation as she is, when you kind of think about it, if she's at the top with a bunch of different dudes that probably want to shag her, probably wish they were with her, at the end of the day, they will not be looking down upon you. They will be looking up to you to a certain degree because you have managed to bag the babe that all of these dudes up there want to bag. Alright? the babes that are much lower than her are busy wondering what exactly is it that this man has gotten that this babe wants so badly that she cannot leave him for another man. And if she does get to leave, at the end of the day, at least you'll not have to deal with someone who's a pain, because they think that their qualifications and professional position actually make them a much better person than you are just because you're not at that level, which is actually a plus in my book, at least in some other people's books as well. But I'm not going to lie, when you look at the second case where dude was pretty much trying to get revenge on the babe, I won't even try and tell you that there's a better way to look at this. Like, the way this guy's pulled it off, like the kind of vile thought that you have to think of while you're like, you hate your ex so much that you're willing to give them a baby and leave them, I think is something that only a sick, twisted mind can come up with. Because you could have done so many other things. Try and get back with this person. You can try and move on and possibly get a better partner or just improve your life such that you don't have to worry about it. But you would much rather stick to the hate, which clearly shows that at least there's still some love in there, which could have been used to your advantage. And you would much rather choose to get revenge, leave something as special and as positive as a baby, and use it to absolutely wreck someone's life. Like, what the fuck? Genuinely, that one should be described as one of the most disgusting, vile things that I have ever heard a man choosing to do. And honestly, if you're a man that's actually trying to do that, I feel like you probably need to get checked first, or you need to check yourself, because you are very insecure and you are clearly deranged in the head. But all that said and done, let me just conclude by saying this. Fellas, my statements still stand. Women choose to get their baby daddies, and if she says that she didn't choose it and it just happened, then it's a case of ignorance, naivete, or stupidity. That one I am still going to continue saying. But this shit of baby trapping women, like, I know y'all talk about love makes people do crazy things, but this goes beyond crazy to a point where it's absolutely vile. And if you know someone that's doing it, or if you're the person that's actively trying to do this, please go get checked, or please tell them to go get checked, because this sort of insecurity is what is wrecking some people's lives, and it is not something to play around with. And to the women, because I know the women are probably listening to this as well. You've clearly seen that there's some dudes out here that are willing to put a baby in you, and not in a joking way. So, considering that your gender has the highest variety in terms of contraceptions, I would advise that you please look into as many of them as possible and see the one that works best for you. And also educate your fellow female friends so that they can do the same, because clearly there's some niggas out here that believe that some of y'all can be so good that they're willing to keep you, or to keep you down to a certain level. Either way, I want your thoughts on this, and I'm not gonna start with because probably I think I'm wrong, because this one isn't about right and wrong. This one's just about raising awareness. So the DMs are open, the socials are in the description below. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.